January 1945. Somewhere along the Western Front. The transport truck rattles over frozen mud. Inside, 17 German women sit shoulder to shoulder, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Most are Blitzmittel, communications auxiliaries who had manned switchboards and radio stations in the Reich's crumbling network. Others are nurses, clerks, civilians caught in the Wehrmacht's collapse. Their wool coats are threadbare. Their faces are pale, drawn tight with exhaustion and something deeper, the hollow-eyed uncertainty of those who have crossed an invisible threshold from one world into another. Outside the canvas cover, American voices call out in English, a language that sounds harsh and strange to their ears. One woman clutches a small leather notebook against her chest. Another stares at her hands, noticing for the first time how thin her fingers have become. They do not yet know what waits for them beyond the checkpoint. But they know the stories. Whispers pass through bunkers and basements in the final days, tales of Soviet vengeance in the East, of chaos and retribution. And now they are prisoners of the Americans. The truck lurches to a stop. Light floods in. For 12 years, the women of the Third Reich had been told a story. It was a story woven into every fabric of their existence, stitched into the very cloth of their identity. They had been raised in the Bund Deutscher Madel, where they learned that a woman's highest calling was service to the Volk, to bear children for the fatherland, to support their men, to embody the virtues of sacrifice and obedience. The Nazi state had constructed an entire mythology around femininity. The German woman as the keeper of the hearth, the guardian of racial purity, the selfless angel whose beauty lay in her submission to a greater cause. Propaganda posters showed them radiant in dirndls, surrounded by blonde children, their eyes cast downward in demure devotion. They were told that the women of the Allied nations, particularly America, were different. Degenerate. Corrupted by Jewish influence and capitalist greed. American women, they learned, painted their faces like prostitutes, smoked cigarettes in public, abandoned their children to work in factories. They were masculinized, morally bankrupt, symptoms of a dying civilization that had lost its way. The propaganda was relentless. And for many, it had become truth. But ideology, no matter how deeply embedded, cannot survive collision with reality unchanged. The processing camp is not what they expected. There are no firing squads. No screaming interrogators. Instead, they are led into a barracks that smells of disinfectant and fresh paint. The floors are clean. Electric lights hum overhead. Steady, reliable light, not the flickering candles and oil lamps they had grown accustomed to in the final months of the war. An American officer, a woman in uniform, stands at the entrance with a clipboard. She is tall, perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair pinned neatly beneath her cap. Her uniform is crisp, tailored, unstained. She looks directly at them, not through them, not past them, but at them, and speaks in clear, practiced German. Her voice is firm but not unkind. You will be examined by medical personnel. You will receive clean clothing and food. If you cooperate, you will be treated according to the Geneva Convention. One of the German women, a former switchboard operator named Greta, stares at the American officer with something approaching disbelief. This woman is not cowering. She is not uncertain. She stands with her shoulders back, her gaze level, and there is an authority in her bearing that seems entirely natural, as if she has never questioned her right to occupy this space, to issue these commands. Greta thinks of the Helferinnen, the auxiliary women in the Wehrmacht, who were always careful to defer to male officers, to soften their voices, to make themselves smaller in the presence of men. This American woman does none of these things. The medical examination is conducted by another American woman, a lieutenant with a stethoscope around her neck and captain's bars on her shoulders. She is a physician. The German women had known female doctors existed in theory, but to see one here, in uniform, with the casual confidence of someone who has never been told her ambitions were inappropriate, it creates a quiet cognitive dissonance. The doctor moves efficiently through the line, checking for lice, for signs of typhus or tuberculosis, for wounds that need treatment. She touches them gently, explains what she is doing before she does it, meets their eyes when she speaks. One of the captives, a nurse named Ilse, watches her work and feels a strange pang. Ilse had been trained to assist surgeons, to hand them instruments and prepare patients, but never to cut, never to lead. She had been told this was natural. That women lacked the constitution for such responsibility. But here is a woman who clearly does not lack anything. Food arrives on metal trays. White bread. Butter, real butter, not the ersatz margarine they had subsisted on for years. Canned meat. Powdered eggs reconstituted into something that tastes almost like the real thing. Coffee, dark and bitter but plentiful. And fruit, canned peaches in syrup, a luxury so profound that several women simply stare at them, unwilling to believe. One woman begins to cry silently as she eats, overwhelmed not by cruelty but by the sudden, shocking presence of abundance. This is not the feast of conquerors gloating over the vanquished. It is simply what the Americans eat. Standard rations. The women had been hungry for so long that they had forgotten what it felt like not to measure every bite, not to save crusts of bread in their pockets for later. The contrast is unbearable. In the Reich's final months, civilians in Berlin had boiled leather belts to make soup. Children had chewed on sawdust bread. And here, the Americans feed their prisoners better than Germany had fed its own people. In the days that follow, the German women are moved to a larger displaced persons camp in the Rhineland. The camp is vast, housing thousands, refugees, former forced laborers, prisoners of war, the displaced debris of a continent torn apart. But within this sprawl, there is order. Barracks are organized. Medical care is available. There is a mess hall, a chapel, even a small school for the children who wander between the rows of tents. And everywhere, there are American women. Not just nurses and doctors, but drivers, clerks, mechanics, radio operators, officers of every rank. They move through the camp with purpose, their uniforms marking them as integral parts of the machinery of occupation. They smoke cigarettes openly, laugh loudly, drive jeeps with casual competence. They are not delicate. They are not deferential. They are simply present, occupying space as if it belongs to them. Greta, the former switchboard operator, is assigned to work in the camp's communications office, a task deemed appropriate given her skills. She expects to work under male supervision, to be given simple, repetitive tasks. Instead, she is placed under the command of a WAC sergeant named Dorothy Miller, a woman from Ohio who runs the communications hub with the precision of a field marshal. Sergeant Miller does not apologize for her authority. She does not soften her instructions or frame them as requests. When a male lieutenant questions one of her decisions, she corrects him, politely but firmly, and he accepts the correction without protest. Greta watches this exchange and feels something shift inside her, a tectonic movement she cannot yet name. In the Reich, such a confrontation would have been unthinkable. A woman did not contradict a man in uniform. A woman did not assert her expertise over his. But here, it is simply normal. The American women are not uniform in their demeanor. Some are gruff and businesslike, others warm and maternal. Lieutenant Sarah Jennings, a Red Cross worker from Massachusetts, brings books to the displaced persons camp. Novels, magazines, newspapers. She sets up a small lending library in one of the barracks and encourages the German women to read. Greta borrows a magazine called Life, published in 1944, and spends an evening paging through it in stunned silence. The photographs show American women working in factories, welding aircraft fuselages, riveting ship hulls. They are not depicted as tragic figures sacrificing their femininity for the war effort. They are portrayed as competent, capable, even glamorous. One photo shows a woman in coveralls and a bandana, her face smudged with grease, grinning at the camera. The caption reads, "She's building the bombers that will win the war." There is no shame in the image. No apology. Just pride. Ilsa, the nurse, is assigned to work in the camp hospital alongside American medical staff. She expected to be relegated to menial tasks, changing bedpans, washing linens. Instead, she is trained by Captain Margaret Sullivan, an Army nurse from Pennsylvania, who teaches her new techniques for wound care and infection control. Captain Sullivan is patient but exacting. She expects Ilsa to think, to ask questions, to make decisions. When Ilsa hesitates, deferring to a male orderly for guidance on a simple matter, Captain Sullivan stops her. "You know the answer," she says in accented but clear German. "Trust yourself. It is such a small thing." 4 words. But for Ilsa, who has spent her entire life being told that trust is something bestowed by men, something earned through obedience. The words land like a stone in still water, sending ripples outward. The symbolic object that recurs throughout their captivity is lipstick. Red lipstick, to be precise. The American women wear it constantly. Bold, unapologetic color on their lips, a small act of defiance against the drabness of war, a declaration that femininity and competence are not mutually exclusive. To the German women, this is deeply unsettling. In the Reich, makeup had been discouraged among respectable women. Cosmetics were associated with decadence, with the kind of shallow vanity that distracted from duty. A proper German woman was natural, pure, unadorned. But these American women wear lipstick the way soldiers wear insignia, as a mark of identity, of belonging. One afternoon, Lieutenant Jennings offers a tube of lipstick to Greta. "Here," she says, smiling. "You look like you could use a little color." Greta takes it hesitantly, unsure whether this is a kindness or a test. That night, alone in the latrine, she applies it carefully, staring at her reflection in a cracked mirror. The woman who looks back at her is a stranger, lips bright red, eyes uncertain. She wipes it off quickly, her hands shaking. But the tube stays in her pocket. The transformation is not immediate. Ideology does not dissolve overnight. The German women carry their conditioning like a second skin, and it does not shed easily. Some resist fiercely, clinging to the certainties they were raised with. They whisper among themselves that the American women are unnatural, that their confidence is a kind of moral failing, that their freedom is a sign of societal decay. They tell themselves that Germany, despite its defeat, was right about the proper order of things. But these protests grow quieter as the weeks pass. Because every day brings new evidence that contradicts the story they were told. They see American women negotiating with male officers as equals. They see them making decisions that affect the lives of thousands. They see them tired, frustrated, angry, but never submissive, never apologetic for taking up space. And slowly, reluctantly, some of the German women begin to ask dangerous questions. If these American women are degenerate, why are they so competent? If their freedom has made them weak, why do they seem so strong? If the Nazi vision of womanhood was the natural order, why does this alternative work? One evening, Greta sits with Ilse and a handful of other German women in the barracks. They are supposed to be sleeping, but sleep is elusive. Ilse speaks quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I used to think," she says, "that we were supposed to serve. That it was noble to make ourselves smaller so that men could be larger. But these American women, they do not make themselves smaller. And their men do not seem to need them to." Another woman, a clerk named Anna, nods slowly. "I saw Sergeant Miller argue with a colonel today," she says. "She told him his requisition order was inefficient. And he listened. He changed it." There is a long silence. Then Greta speaks, her voice thick with something she cannot quite articulate. "What if we were lied to?" she asks. "What if everything we were told about how things must be? What if it was just a story? Just one way of doing things, not the only way?" No one answers. But the question hangs in the air like smoke. Historical records document these encounters with surprising detail. Reports filed by American military personnel and aid workers frequently mention the shock and confusion exhibited by German female prisoners upon encountering American servicewomen. A Red Cross worker named Helen Stevenson wrote in her diary in April 1945, "The German women seem genuinely bewildered by us. They watch us constantly, as if trying to decipher a puzzle. One woman asked me if I had children. When I said no, she asked if I was married. When I said yes, she seemed unable to reconcile these facts. 'But you are here,' she said. 'Who is keeping your home?' I told her my husband was in the Pacific and my home was waiting for both of us. She looked at me as if I had said something heretical." Another report, filed by Captain Dorothy Nash, an army nurse stationed in Bavaria, notes, "The German female auxiliaries express surprise that we are not coarse or mannish. I believe they expected us to be crude, loud, unwomanly. They do not understand that we can be both professional and feminine. The concept seems foreign to them." The interrogation of German women by American intelligence officers often revealed deep ideological conditioning. Lieutenant Colonel James Donovan, an OSS officer, recorded interviews with dozens of female prisoners in the summer of 1945. One woman, identified only as Subject G47, told him, "We were taught that American women had abandoned their true nature, that they were slaves to Jewish capitalism and had lost their souls. But the women I have met here, they do not seem lost. They seem very certain of themselves. This troubles me." Another, Subject G63, said, "I expected them to be hard, like men. But they are not hard. They are simply free. I do not have a word for it in German. We do not have this thing." These testimonies reveal a profound dislocation, a confrontation between lived experience and ideological certainty that left many German women grappling with questions they had never been permitted to ask. The abundance of the Americans becomes its own form of psychological warfare. It is not just the food, though the food is staggering. It is the casual waste, the sheer surplus of everything. Trucks arrive daily with supplies, blankets, medicine, soap, toothpaste, sanitary napkins, things the German women had learned to do without or improvise poorly. The Americans distribute these items without ceremony, without rationing, as if there is an endless supply somewhere beyond the horizon. And perhaps there is. The German women had been told that America was weak, that its decadent people lacked the discipline and sacrifice necessary to sustain a war effort. But the evidence before their eyes tells a different story. Ilse is transferred to a military hospital in Frankfurt, where she works alongside American medical staff treating wounded soldiers and displaced civilians. Captain Sullivan writes her a letter of recommendation, praising her skill and dedication. The letter helps Ilse secure a position at a civilian hospital after the war, where she will eventually become a senior nurse, and later, decades later, an advocate for women in medicine. She will never forget the American captain who told her to trust herself. She will pass that lesson on. The historical evidence of this cultural collision is fragmentary but revealing. Surveys conducted by American military government officials in 1945 and 1946 asked German civilians about their perceptions of American occupation forces. Among women, responses frequently mentioned surprise at the behavior and status of American servicewomen. One respondent, a woman from Stuttgart, wrote, "I did not believe women could be soldiers. I thought it was propaganda. But I have seen them, and they are real. They are not pretending. This has made me wonder what else I was told that was not true." Another, from Hamburg, noted, "The American women are very sure of themselves. At first, I thought this was arrogance. Now I think it is something else. I think it is what freedom looks like." The war ends officially in May, but for the women in the camps, the end is less a moment than a process, a slow unfurling of consequences and reckonings. Greta receives a letter from her mother, who survived the bombing of Dresden and is living in a refugee shelter in the East. The letter is brief, written in pencil on scrap paper. Her mother asks if Greta is safe, if she has enough to eat, if she is being treated well. Greta sits with the letter for a long time before she writes back. She wants to tell her mother about the American women, about Sergeant Miller and Lieutenant Jennings, about the lipstick and the jazz music and the strange, disorienting experience of being treated as a full person rather than a supporting character in someone else's story. But she does not know how to put it into words. How do you explain to someone who has lived their entire life within one narrative that another narrative is possible? How do you describe the shape of a cage to someone who has never been outside it? In the end, she writes only, "I am safe. I am learning. I will come home when I can." Years later, historians will look back on this period and analyze the role of American women in the occupation of Germany. They will examine the ways in which cultural exchange, intentional and accidental, shaped the reconstruction of German society. They will debate the extent to which the presence of Allied servicewomen contributed to the gradual liberalization of West German gender norms in the 1950s and 60s. They will note that many of the women who encountered American servicewomen during the occupation went on to become advocates for women's rights, educators, politicians. The causal lines are not direct. History is never that clean. But the seeds were planted. The lipstick, in the end, becomes more than a symbol. Greta keeps the tube long after it is empty, carrying it with her when she returns to her shattered hometown in late 1945. She keeps it through the hard years of Reconstruction, when she works as a translator for the American military government, when she marries a schoolteacher who does not expect her to make herself smaller, when she raises a daughter and tells her that she can be anything she wants, a phrase that once would have sounded absurd but now feels like a promise. She keeps it even after the color fades and the metal casing tarnishes. It sits in a drawer, a relic of the moment when her certainty cracked open and something new began to grow. The truth that emerges from this collision of worlds is not simple or comfortable. It is not that the American way was perfect or that the German way was wholly wrong. It is that there is more than one way to be a woman, more than one way to be human. The American women who occupied Germany in 1945 were not saints. They carried their own prejudices, their own blind spots. Many of them would return to an America that still denied them full equality, that would pressure them to leave their jobs and return to domesticity in the post-war years. The confidence that so awed the German women was hard-won and fragile, the product of a specific historical moment that would not last. But for the German women who encountered them, the impact was undeniable. They had been told that female submission was natural, that authority in women was unnatural, that freedom for women was dangerous. And then they met women who were free, who wielded authority, who had not collapsed into chaos or immorality but who were simply living fully, without apology. In the end, what the German women captives encountered was not just a different set of policies or a different political system. They encountered a different story about what it means to be a woman in the world. And stories, once heard, cannot be unheard. They linger. They grow. They change the shape of what seems possible. The women who left those camps in 1945 and 1946 carried that story with them, hidden in the folds of their experience, waiting for the right moment to unfold. Some of them would tell it to their daughters. Some would tell it to themselves, late at night, when the old certainties crept back and whispered that they had imagined it all. But the story remained. A red slash of lipstick. A woman in uniform who did not apologize. A voice that said, "You are allowed to take up room in the world." And slowly, unevenly, incompletely, the world began to make a little more room.